Number 10. Null. While Null is more of the creator or father of all symbiotes, he's also kind of like the original symbiote in a way. As such, he has control over all symbiotes, sort of like his children, and he can manipulate them to do whatever he wants. Which, sure, Null is all-powerful, but also still a pretty weird bit of history that we discovered as we learned more and more about the bizarre and gloriously strange story of Clintar. His abilities include allowing him to turn all of his symbiotes, all of Clintar, into a space dragon. Yep. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining, just acknowledging how amazingly spacey and strange he is. He also managed to use his symbiotes to merge with the Silver Surfer for a brief moment, likely plotting to use the Silver Surfer as his very own symbiote herald. Oh man, Null definitely needs some symbiote heralds. That is a story I would read the heck out of. Number 9. Agony. Agony is the forced offspring of Venom, who was also modified by the Life Foundation. While Venom has been known to have somewhat acidic powers, Agony took this ability one bizarre step further, possessing the ability to spit acid harmful enough to actually melt human flesh. But it doesn't stop there. Agony also possesses the weird and unique ability to absorb substances and then reuse them itself, like Spider-Man's webbing. Number 8. Magic Venom. This whole thing doesn't make a ton of sense to me, to be honest, though the abilities, I guess, can be explained away by being connected to magic? During the War of the Realms, Eddie Brock got to create his own version of Venom when he was gifted a Dreamstone by a dark elf witch. After he accepted it, the witch revealed that Eddie would now have to serve and fight for her ruler Malekith. Haha, gotcha. But of course, Eddie didn't want to, so instead, he chomped off one of her arms. That whole interaction was pretty weird, because, I mean, obviously, he's just gonna bite off one of your arms. What do you think was gonna happen, witch? And Eddie then used the Dreamstone, which can make your dreams come true, to create a new version of a magic Venom suit, which was also pretty strange. This version of Venom came with no voice of its own, but for some reason seemed to amplify Eddie's negative emotions. As such, Eddie decided to split up the magical symbiote, having the power to do so, transforming it into Asgardian armor for the civilians that he saved. Already a pretty weird ability. He could also control weather with the symbiote, because I guess dreams and magic? Number 7. Lasher. What's weird about this one is Lasher actually exhibits a less refined version of a power that the Venom symbiote attempted to exert earlier on. Okay, so I'm not going to lie, this one is just as interesting as it is strange in terms of symbiote history, which is kind of why I selfishly wanted to share it with you guys on this list. But it is additionally and also fairly outlandish and odd power, so it also belongs here as well. Lasher is a forced offspring of Venom, whose creation was manipulated by the government and the Life Foundation. Lasher's weird power as a result of that is that it can bond with two hosts, though one host needs to be less sentient or non-sentient in order for it to work. This is interesting because it is originally a power that Venom attempted to flex when it sought to bond with both Peter Parker and Eddie Brock at the same time. A symbiote threesome of sorts, you might say. However, it didn't work and caused Venom to pass out from exhaustion just for trying it. The other weird thing about this enhanced ability for Lasher is out of all of the things the government could work to improve, this seems like kind of a weird one to pick. All it grants the symbiote is additional control over a war dog ultimately, which is cool, but it doesn't seem like a huge advantage in comparison to, say, trying to cure one of its natural weaknesses, which would be better. Like, now it's not weak to fire or something like that.
Moving on to number 6, Lizard Powers. On Earth 19919, we got to witness what the amalgamation of the Hulk and Spider-Man foe, Lizard, would look like. Known more commonly as Lizard Hulk, apt. This version of Bruce Banner has been infected with the spider virus in Spider Island issue 1, when the Spider Queen took over Manhattan. Lots of spiders. In order to rewrite the spider's DNA and remove the Spider Queen's control, Hulk and other heroes went under procedures to alter themselves. Now for Hulk, this was being injected by the Lizard Serum, which transformed him into the lizard-esque version of himself. It also gave him the abilities that Curtis Connors of Earth 616 has, including wall crawling, a faster regenerative healing factor, a tail that he can detach and then regrow, fangs and claws, and lastly lastly, the ability to telepathically communicate and control forms of reptilian life within a 2-mile distance. Moving on to number 5, Venom Hulk. Once upon a time, the Venom symbiote bonded with the Hulk, upgrading Bruce Banner from regular Hulk to one with all of Venom's abilities. That's scary, guys. While we don't get to see the full range of what this terrifying character can do, it still manages to go on a rampage and be a massive threat to multiple heroes. For context, this occurred in a story titled What If the Alien Costume Had Possessed Spider-Man in What If Volume 2 Issue 4. The hypothetical scenario in this one features Peter Parker not going to the Fantastic Four in time to have the symbiote removed from him, leading it to it hopping around possessing a bunch of Marvel heroes. It was a short-lived bond though. Venom would sense Thor's power after he had bonded with Hulk and then jump ship for the Asgardian instead. That's like kind of a diss. Like, I'd rather be in Thor. And at number 4, demonic abilities. Want demon powers? Just shack up in hell for a while and bam, you'll become orange and capable of all sorts of terrible things. Or at least that's what Infernal Hulk has taught us. Hailing from Earth 11638, Infernal Hulk has a fascinating story. Upon first glance, he is just the Hulk merged with the demon, and while that's not wrong, there's more to it than that. Bruce Banner of Earth 11638 is the Sorcerer Supreme. He casts a spell in which his Hulk half is separated from him and banished to the depths of hell, but it backfires because the Hulk goes down into hell and becomes more demonic, corrupted by the demons he encounters, gaining some of their powers and also turning orange, as one does in hell. He finds his way back up to Earth and wreaks havoc, with Bruce ultimately having to remerge them and then banish himself to hell with the Hulk in order to keep humanity safe. Moving on to number 3, different emotions, different Hulks. Here's a power that actually hails from the 616 universe. Did you know that different Hulks can manifest inside of Bruce Banner's psyche, and that based on their core emotion that they derive from, can have different power levels and different influence over Banner and the Hulk? Case in point, Kul. I don't know, it's Hulk spelled backwards. K-L-U-H. Let's go with Kul on this one. Kul is the manifestation of Bruce Banner's sadness rather than rage. These manifestations are rooted in different emotions, and they're actually aspects of Hulk's personality and not Banner's, giving him less control over them. All things considered, that is pretty rotten luck. Kul has more power than the regular Hulk, and when Hulk is really sad, this guy comes out to play. He's significantly stronger, larger, and has a set of claws that would leave anyone shivering in their boots. In addition to that, we've also seen other iterations of Hulk's personality in the past, including Guilt Hulk and Devil Hulk, although Kul managed to be its own independent entity, existing outside of Banner and Hulk's mind. Correct me in those comments, friends, please. And at number 2, Unipower. Once upon a time, the Hulk became Captain Universe. Now, Captain Universe is a physical manifestation of something called the Unipower, which possesses an individual when there is a crisis, filling them with the power they need in order to put an end to said crisis, making that individual one of the strongest beings in the entire universe. Now, the power is absolutely immense. Multiple different characters in the Marvel Universe have been endowed with the Unipower in the past, including our pal Bruce Banner in the comic Captain Universe: The Incredible Hulk. Captain Universe uses the Hulk to try to restore its memory and find a scientist named Gilbert Wiles. Hulk wields this power temporarily, making him capable of things like energy manipulation, matter manipulation, energy projection, you name it. He's borderline omnipotent in this form. Speaking of being omnipotent, in at number 1, the Power Cosmic. Yeah, the Hulk had that once. The Hulk of Earth 2149 has been endowed with the Power Cosmic. Impressive, right? But not because he's some herald of Galactuses. No, he's actually a zombie, and came about getting that power upgrade by a kind of taboo means. Earth 2149 is the Marvel Zombie Universe. In it, everyone gets infected with a zombie virus and ends up eating one another, having an insatiable hunger. Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, is one of the worst of the worst. He, alongside other prominent zombified Marvel characters, end up devouring Galactus and Silver Surfer, and by eating them, they inherit the Power Cosmic. While one could argue that Galactus surely could take on a bunch of zombies, suspend your disbelief a little bit here. The Hulk becomes one of the zombie Galacti who ends up going around the galaxy in search of more food, pretty much obliterating all life in the process. All because he had a big old gigantic snack in the form of Galactus. Yikes.
A number of villains were created specifically for the 1966 Batman show, Egghead being one of them. He is an egotistical, egg-obsessed man whose brain is too big for his head, which is why it's so long. This man is pretty exceptional. He was a professor at Gotham Academy. He eventually turned to a life of crime, working with the likes of the Riddler. It's unclear why he stepped into villainhood. Maybe one day he just cracked. During his villain activities, he met a woman and fell in love, but she didn't want to marry until Egghead was better off financially, so he had hatched a plan to take over the city. This did not go over easy for him, and he was foiled by Batman. He later tried to hatch a dinosaur, which Batman did not omelet that slide and defeated him again. He's gone from the screen to the page to the big screen in various cameos. Egghead is one of the only villains to figure out that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Due to the enormous expense of the heroes, he used clues about Batman's mannerisms to make the connection. One of my personal irrational fears is that my atoms and whatever I'm currently touching's atoms will line up perfectly and I will be painfully fused into whatever that thing is. In our world, I know that's not scientifically possible, but in the Marvel universe, it seems to be. Maybe. In Spidey's Super Stories 8, Spider-Man encounters a man fused with a wall, making him the Wall. He was a regular kid until an accident at work permanently altered his being. The accident being an entire brick wall coming crashing down on him. It's not really explained how he fuses with the bricks, but the only semi-plausible reason I can think of is their atoms lining up, which hopefully they'll line up again and he can be freed. We only see him in Spidey stories, but he was based on a character created for the Electric Company TV show. The Spidey Super Stories and the show went hand in hand. The show was designed to entice kids to practice speech and writing, as were the Spidey comics. Marvel provided Spidey to the channel for free, and he wasn't the only big name there. Morgan Freeman and Rita Moreno starred as well. As for the Wall, we don't see him again until a profile on the Marvel Strike Force website goes up. Batman's valet, Alfred, is a saint and deserves nothing but good things, so why did the creators of Detective Comics feel the need to crush him with a boulder, have his body kidnapped and experimented on, and brought back to life Frankenstein style, turning him into a villain wanting to kill his family? I don't get it. After the experiments are done on his near-dead body, his mind and body have been twisted into reverse, so all the love he felt for Batman and Robin is now hatred for Batman and Robin. The Outsider is a physically separate being from Alfred. Alfred is stuck in a coma-like state. In the final battle between the Outsider and Batman and Robin, Batman figures out how to get Alfred back to normal. The unfortunate part is that the Outsider is still inside Alfred and every once in a while comes out again. Marvel creates some interesting characters, like an elf hitman. His name is Melf, M-E-L-F, but his alias is Elf with a Gun, and that's it, that's what he is. It seems that he's part of a bigger group, Elves with Guns. We don't know where he's from officially, but the Elves with Guns are agents for the Tribunals, a force dedicated to preserving order in the universe. Melf was a weird guy. He would go around offing random people and he was never caught. He was only stopped because he was run over by a truck. His nephew Ralph then took up his undisclosed mission. However, if we look at him like he was working for the Tribunals, then maybe his victims weren't as random. This would be a great and easy to follow explanation for everything, which is why it has been disproven. Turns out the Tribunals were fake, and we are once again back to wondering why a killer elf was roaming the streets.
Number 6. Scorn. Scorn is the offspring of Carnage and Tanis Knives' prosthetic arm, because apparently that's a thing that can happen. As such, it has unique technological abilities, being part tech, part symbiote. It can fuse and interact with tech and seems to have a level of immunity when it comes to the usual sonic weaknesses that most symbiotes suffer from. What a weird symbiote, though. A weird origin. Number 5. Toxin. As its name implies, Toxin has the unique power of toxic fangs. While venom itself seems to sometimes be able to produce acid, these toxic fangs and the toxic bite that it comes with seem to be a power that doesn't really come much from anywhere specific that makes sense. Symbiotes obviously possess their own power set due to their unique physiology, but when we were originally introduced to symbiotes, it was implied that unique abilities were actually cloned from those that they had bonded with previously, making Toxin's bite kind of an odd one, because where does it come from? But then again, many of the other symbiotes have also appeared to have unique abilities, so maybe this is just a thing and we just learned about it later, and so symbiotes can be born with, or I guess develop, unique abilities just all on their own? And you might be thinking, like, maybe it does come from one of Toxin's parents, or Toxin's parent symbiote, but his parent symbiote was Carnage, so I don't know. What is that? Number 4. Carnage. Speaking of Carnage. I mean, the longer a character's history, the greater the chance that things might get pretty out there for the character. Like when Carnage and Venom randomly displayed the ability to travel through the internet in the 90s. But one of the other crazier abilities we've seen is the ability for Carnage to control another person's mind. And I'm not just talking about the usual back and forth bonding here between symbiote and host, though I feel like Cletus and a symbiote, when we're talking about Carnage, are really a combo team. No one is really vying for control. The decisions they actually make together, and those decisions are both equal parts theirs. Whereas Venom has always said, "We are Venom," implying some independence between Brock and his symbiote, Carnage always refers to itself as one single entity, fully merged. "I am Carnage." What I'm talking about here is what we've seen with Carnage both in Volume 1 and later in Volume 2, when it recovered these powers, exhibiting the ability to control or influence others' minds. It almost completely took control of Stark's mind and suit in Carnage Volume 1, Issue 5, which we've seen other symbiotes do this, but it's not a power you see very often. Where does it come from? Why does it exist? Because it comes from Null? Number 3, Sleeper. Another symbiote that possesses unusual chemical-related powers is Sleeper. Sleeper is another offspring of Venom. It was left in the care of Alchemax by its parent, Venom, and their partner, Eddie Brock, who helped in a way to give birth to Sleeper, I guess you could say, making Eddie Brock, I guess, kinda like a parent to Sleeper too, although not genetically speaking per se. Even Alchemax was surprised when Sleeper seemed to develop all its own, a power of chemokinesis. It can create and secrete chemicals for a variety of purposes. It can use this ability to propel itself through space, manipulate the emotions of others, cloak its scent, control minds, and even to neutralize and attack enemies. Number 2, Anti-Venom. This is a pretty strange symbiote, even in just how it came to be. Anti-Venom is a symbiote that was created when Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, used his powers to cure Eddie Brock's cancer. But for some reason, his power bonded with the remnants of Venom that still lingered within Brock and created a new symbiote known as Anti-Venom. Being that this symbiote was created in such an odd way, some unique abilities made sense. It had been created after bonding with Eddie's white blood cells, so of course it had immense healing and cleansing powers. But it also for some reason had immunity to the usual weaknesses of a symbiote. It was immune to fire and sonic attacks for some reason, and this was never really fully explained, and just chalked up to it being an extremely different kind of symbiote. So there's still a lot that I feel like we didn't really figure out about Anti-Venom before it went poof, bye. Number 1, Venom. Venom has displayed countless abilities over the years and has changed as time has changed along with it. It has been revealed to be able to merge with inorganic material, giving us briefly a Venommobile for a bit when it was also bonded with a host at the same time. The Venom symbiote actually can seemingly bond to anything, including a dinosaur in the Old Man Logan universe. It's learned how to grow wings, has immunity to Ghost Rider's penance stare for some reason, maybe because it was once bonded with Ghost Rider, has access to a pocket dimension, can camouflage itself, and can travel through telephone lines and also travel through the internet. But one of the strangest powers was revealed during the time it spent with Flash Thompson as Agent Venom in outer space during the Space Knight series. At that point, it was revealed that after being cleansed, well, partially cleansed really, as it would later turn out, it could hear the voice of the universe, which gave it kind of like a galactic SOS radar, allowing Venom to sense when planets were in danger. Yeah, entire planets. Probably one of the most out there powers that we have seen it display. Spacey powers are always so weird and out there. They're great.
Number 10, Tattooed Man. Mark Richards was a former Marine who was presumed dead before showing up in Gotham as a killer for hire with the ability to make his tattoos come to life as projections, which then attack his enemies. He explains his powers as being due to a magic process called sin grafting, which takes the sins of his victims and makes them into tattoo monsters. Now, that's comic booky and fun, but that's also incredibly vague. Why are sins turning into tattoos? Which sins are worth a tattoo monster? I don't know, it's just weird to me that none of the heroes or villains he comes across ever seem to ask any follow-up questions. Number 9, the Fisherman. Fisherman is an Aquaman villain who often works as a smuggler, running weapons to Atlantean rebels and using trained dolphins to run drugs into France. He uses a large fishing pole with super strong fishing line to attack and tie up his enemies, as well as a series of specialized lures that blow up or shoot gases at his enemies. Dumb, but pretty straightforward. What makes him so confusing is that it has since been revealed that his helmet is actually a sentient parasite that takes over their host's mind and makes them commit fishing-related crimes. Kind of like if Venom was a retired dad. What I don't get about this is why would a parasite give its host the ability to be good at fishing? Was the parasite formed in a Bass Pro Shop? Backstory and the theme of this villain just do not match. In case you're thinking, maybe it was the host's idea to go with the hobbyist theme. Each time the parasite has bonded with a new host, that person has also taken on the identity of the fisherman. So it is the parasite's choice to continue with the fisherman theme. Number 8. Swarm. Fritz von Meyer was a Nazi scientist who came across an irradiated beehive and began experimenting on the bees, hoping that he would be able to control them to do his bidding. The experiment went wrong and the bees turned on him, devouring Fritz. As he was eaten by the bees, his consciousness was spread between all the bees in the hive. So, he was granted control of the bees, but at a weird, twisty cost. He uses this ability to control bees, to form them into a body-like shape, and tries to cleanse the earth of all humans. He can also form other shapes out of bees and use them to attack people. I don't get it. I mean, radioactive or not, why would getting eaten by bees, who only eat pollen by the way, cause you to become a hive mind? Look, he's a very visually interesting villain, but he raises a lot more questions than he answers. Number 7. Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mr. Mxyzptlk is a 5th-dimensional being who has developed an obsession with Superman, and he likes to spend his time harassing the Man of Steel and putting him through various ordeals for his own amusement. He can fly, teleport, and create essentially anything he likes just with a thought. He's also a character with cosmic awareness, sometimes speaking directly to the reader as though he's aware of his place in a comic book. A lot of his powers are explained by saying that he can manipulate reality. However, what's weird is his weakness is that if someone tricks him into saying his name backwards, he's forced to return to the 5th dimension for 90 days and undo any damage that he caused. Look, if he can do what he wants, why does that work? This is a creature that can bend reality to his will, yet he's repeatedly brought down by saying a word. Is this self-imposed? Is he just trying to be a good sport? Neither would surprise me, but the only thing I know for sure about Mr. Mxyzptlk is that nothing he does really makes sense. That's kind of the point.
The Phantom Stranger has led a lot of lives, literally. One might be canon now, but it's only a matter of time before someone else grabs a pen and messes with his history. His current origin in the New 52 story is that he was Judas, betrayer of Jesus, and that makes him one of the greatest sinners that has ever lived. Another is that he was a fallen angel who didn't pick a side during the Heavenly War. Another is that he was Isaac from the Bible story. Not exactly the same though. This time his son died because King Herod was looking for Jesus, and now Isaac hates Jesus and later him. Another is that he was spared during biblical times but didn't want to be, but the angels didn't want to let him in heaven, so he has to walk the earth alone forever. And the fourth is that he was actually one of the last remaining parts of our previous universe. At the final curtain, he approaches those studying the end and passes a part of himself onto a new person, so when the universe is reborn, they get a Phantom Stranger too. In addition to his many backstories, it is also up in the air as to whether or not he is a villain. To me, I think he started out as a villain. He did betray Jesus in at least a few of these, but later realized the error of his ways and became a sort of hero. Lots of people just choose to ignore many New 52 storylines, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see what sticks for Phantom. Phantom Stranger is now connected to a villain called Question, but that wasn't always the case. Question at one point was a character that was thought to be a supernatural power, thought to be because it was never made clear. One of the only things that is now considered canon about him is that he has committed a crime bad enough to be considered one of 3 of the world's greatest sinners, part of the trio of sin with Phantom. We never know this guy's name. Before being turned into Question, the guy was obsessed with power and having his name feared by all. As his punishment, he got his face taken away and he can no longer remember himself or his name. This was introduced in the New 52. Before that, he was just an alter ego of Vic Sage, but then Flashpoint caused them to separate and even have a brand new different history thing going on. This version of him isn't that bad, he just really wants to know who he is. He also shares a name with a Taylor Swift song. It's all very confusing. I am hoping that we will eventually get a name reveal out of him, whether he's another universe version of an existing Marvel villain, or if he's really a historical figure. Identity theft and retcons have led to quite a confusing backstory for Zorn. Zorn's debut was in New X-Men Annual 2001, and at the end, he was revealed to be Magneto in disguise. Only he wasn't. Later it was revealed that it was actually Zorn pretending to be Magneto, pretending to be Zorn, and Zorn was being controlled by someone named Sublime to foster mutant hatred in the world. Easy to follow. At the end of the Magneto identity theft fight, Zorn dies, but not really. His body is done for, but his essence was still around through his connection to Sublime, so he came back. The creator of Zorn in 2001 always intended for Zorn to be Magneto, actually Magneto, so when you read the story there are hints to it the whole way through. It was because the editors liked Zorn's character, and Marvel wanted Magneto alive so they could use him again, that the confusing aspect of his story was born. Zorn also has a twin brother with very similar powers to him, so sometimes Zorn returns but it's Zorn 1, or it's not Zorn 1 and it's actually Zorn 2, it's a whole thing. Duella Dent's origin is confusing because she wants it to be. She is a pathological liar when it comes to her family tree. She is claimed to be the daughter of the Joker, Catwoman, the Riddler, the Penguin, Scarecrow, and Two-Face, and even more. She was first introduced as the Joker's daughter, but her last name is Dent, the same name belonging to Harvey Dent, or Two-Face. So now she is known as Two-Face's daughter for a while, until Robin figures out she's not the right age to be his daughter. She agrees and then just disappears. She appeared in the Teen Titans comic series, and she was planned to be revealed as a time traveler that gets reality warped one too many times and is driven insane. Unfortunately, we never got to see this as the comics were cancelled. Technically, Duella doesn't want to be a villain, but she does fight a lot of heroes and lies all the time. She was later revealed to actually legit be the daughter of another universe Joker and Three-Face, a female variation of Two-Face. Is this a lie? Maybe. You can literally never know what's real in these universes anymore. Turns out, neither can Duella. It's suggested that because her mind was warped so much, every time she switched Earths, her consciousness switches slightly as well, which is why she's named so many different parents. She was just confused. The Joker is one of the most iconic villains of all time, so it's no wonder so many people want to leave their mark on his story. Unfortunately, that makes for a pretty messed up, twisted, confusing history. One thing is common: he ends up in acid and comes out looking like that. Who he was before, and even during the swim, is up to whoever is holding the pen. In 1951's Detective Comics 168, the Joker had been the Red Hood, also a criminal, and one night he decided to rob a factory. He escaped by swimming through the pool of chemical wastes, and I genuinely think he thought he would come out normal. He didn't, and to his delight figured out his new look was scary and used it to his advantage. In later versions, like The Killing Joke in 1988, he is a failing comedian and once again finds himself in the chemical factory, but this time he gets scared into the acid. In Batman the Animated Series, he was a hitman first. In the very recent and Oscar-worthy interpretation from Joaquin Phoenix is that he didn't fall in the acid yet. His look is just makeup, and he has a neurological disorder that makes him randomly laugh. There is another movie coming up with Lady Gaga as Harley, so maybe the acid will make an appearance then too. Time for the big guy, the MCU's newest big bad wolf and my never-ending headache, Kang the Conqueror. One thing seems to generally stay consistent: every version of Kang starts out as Nathaniel Richards. Where Nathaniel comes from? We have options. There was a Nathaniel from Earth 616 that brought peace to Earth 6311 when he traveled there. This made him a big deal. He was known as the legendary benefactor, but he wasn't the Nathaniel native to the planet, so another Nathaniel was eventually born. This Nathaniel was maybe descended from the great benefactor himself, or Dr. Doom. This Nathaniel's history was messed up by another him, causing him to be a good guy for a while. Nathaniel grows up and is bored, so he travels back in time to Earth 616's ancient Egypt. His plans? Be king. Eventually he tries to return home after losing some fights, but is caught in a time storm and transported ahead to the 40th century Earth 6311. The future is a mess, they are at war again, and the people have regressed into barbarians. Nathaniel has found the perfect group to take over. This is the first time he takes on the name Kang the Conqueror. He took his name and ran, conquering Earth 6311, that galaxy, and then trying to attack Earth 616. He wanted more power, but there was also a historical record that said that eventually a celestial Madonna was going to give birth to the most powerful entity ever, and Kang wanted to be their dad. This was the confusing origin of one version of Kang, but generally considered to be the base Kang, kind of. There are so many versions of him under a variety of names: Nathaniel, Kang, Immortus, Scarlet Centurion, Victor Timely, Mr. Griffin, Prime Kang, and Kang the Conglomerator.
Number 10. Pax Americana. Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly created the multiversity Pax Americana in 2014, and DC Comics fans were mostly baffled. As part of the Multiversity series of books, different universes based on companies purchased by DC Comics were explored in their own stories. This one focused on Earth 4, which is based around the Charlton Comics heroes of Pax Americana, hence the name. We saw characters like Peacemaker, The Question, Blue Beetle, and all that fun stuff, but in a story that almost seemed like a mirror of the Watchmen story with the Charlton characters standing in. The story was also told basically in reverse, but also not really. Ultimately, it all revolves around the president that formed the Pax Americana and the mystery of whatever happened to America's first crime fighter. It's worth a read for sure, and after the initial read through, when you're confused about what's going on, I would maybe look up a guide on how to read it properly and try again. Number 9. Carol and Marcus. This one is not only confusing, but it's a little disturbing too, which I think might also help to make it even more confusing in the long run. So basically, in Avengers 197 from 1980, Carol Danvers, back when she was Miss Marvel, discovers that she is pregnant. She doesn't remember how it happened, and that sweet baby is growing quick. Not 3 issues later, in Avengers 200, Carol pops the little sucker out within days of even finding out she's pregnant. All the Avengers are weirdly excited about it, and they treat Carol like she's the unreasonable one for not being excited. The baby, who has been named Marcus, then grows up into adulthood in basically hours, and reveals that he is actually the son of Immortus, the ruler of Limbo, and one of the different incarnations of Kang the Conqueror. Immortus had Marcus with a woman that he had apparently plucked out of time, but Marcus was trapped in Limbo until he could be born again on Earth. So, Marcus had brought Carol Danvers to Limbo, romanced her with a combination of charm and quote subtle manipulation, and he got Miss Marvel pregnant so that he could be born on Earth. The fact that they then go on to explore the romance before it was retconned is one thing, but it honestly makes absolutely no sense, and it's confusing as hell. Number 8. Odyssey. Wonder Woman Odyssey feels almost like a DC Elseworlds story, like it shouldn't fit into the main timeline, which itself is pretty damn confusing because, guess what? It definitely is not an Elseworlds story. Odyssey was another of DC's attempts to reboot Wonder Woman, erasing all the continuity that had been in the series since Crisis on Infinite Earths, giving us a Diana who had no connection to anyone that she had been interacting with for years in the comic books. The story it tells is not too convoluted itself. It drops us into the middle of the action, making it feel like we've missed a good chunk of the story, but it goes on to tell a pretty linear line of storytelling. It's just so disjointed from the rest of pretty much anything else. But then, it was basically completely unnecessary because the same year that Odyssey ended, the entire DC universe was rebooted with Flashpoint and the New 52, with nothing about Diana's new reboot being carried over. Number 7. Clone Saga. It's hard to know where to start with the Clone Saga. The simplest place is with Ben Reilly, also known as the Scarlet Spider. Ben is the clone of Peter from the 70s, finally returned. The original plan for the character was to reveal that he was actually Peter himself, and that the Peter fans knew was the clone. The idea was for Peter to step away from the role of Spider-Man and give it to the true Peter Parker so that the clone Peter could focus on his life with Mary Jane. And if that doesn't confuse you, then buckle up, because that didn't even happen, because Ben Reilly said no to becoming Spider-Man twice. And then, to keep fan interest going in the series, the writers started introducing more and more clones, like Kane, who was actually pretty cool, and Spider-Side, who was like a big tanky Spider-Man who kind of sucked. But then even more clones were created on top of that, even an entire army of them, and it resulted in far too many spin-off stories. On top of all of that, Marvel also introduced the characters of Judas Traveler and his buddy, I guess, the Scryer, and neither of them did anything except say some ominous stuff that never resulted in anything. There is Gaunt also, who was introduced to confuse Peter, which evidently confused us all more, and then, right at the very end, it was revealed that the mastermind behind the entire entire ordeal was Norman Osborn, who had not been connected to the story in any way up to that point, and that's because he had been passed away since the 70s. Do you see? Do you see the issue here? It's confusing.
Number 6, Polka Dot Man. Although he doesn't technically have superpowers, this villain's gimmick is too confusing not to get into. Polka Dot Man commits crimes by tearing off the various colored dots on his costume, throwing them, and then letting them expand and morph into the various gadgets that he needs. For example, he can tear a dot off, transform it into a buzzsaw blade, and throw it at Batman and Robin as he escapes on a flying saucer, as he does in his first appearance in Detective Comics number 300. Well, I can suspend my belief when I see Batman pull whatever he needs out of his utility belt. The idea of Polka Dot Man being able to carry around full vehicles on his costume is just too much. What makes it even more confusing is we've never received any explanation for how this works. His origin and powers were altered and frankly improved in the live-action adaptation of The Suicide Squad, where it was revealed that his mother had been a scientist at Star Labs who had exposed him to an alien virus in an attempt to give him superpowers. This resulted in him being able to cast glowing colored dots that destroyed whatever they came into contact with. Number 5, Video Man. Video Man first appeared in Spider-Man Family featuring Amazing Friends number 1. He is a giant, two-dimensional, 8-bit creature that only yells video game phrases like "Destroy all combatants!" He can shoot energy blasts from his arms that can blow up whatever they hit, which I can get on board with, but what makes him so confusing is that we're given zero context or explanation as to who or what he is or where he comes from. He just shows up and attacks Spider-Man and Iceman. At first I thought maybe he'd actually escape from an arcade game, but once he's destroyed, the heroes discover an internal processor unit, which implies that he was created by someone and designed for the purpose of destruction. But who created him? More importantly, how did they create him? Will we ever find out in another appearance? No, because he never showed up again. Number 4, Hammerhead. Former mob hitman who was critically injured on a job gone wrong. Hammerhead was taken into surgery and given a steel alloy plate, which gave his head its distinctive odd appearance. Although this barely qualifies as a power, he is known to attack his enemies by literally charging headfirst into them. He regularly smashes his head into walls and takes blows to the head from Spider-Man, seemingly brushing them off due to the metal plate on his head. This makes no sense if you know anything about how concussions work. In extremely basic terms, a concussion is caused when your head gets hit and your brain bangs against the inside of your skull, thus damaging your brain. So, even if the steel plate prevents Hammerhead's skull from breaking, the sudden shock of smashing into a wall or taking a punch from a superhero with the proportionate strength of a spider would still cause him severe brain damage. It's why football players get concussions despite wearing helmets. Even once Hammerhead's brain was transferred into an adamantium skeleton by Mr. Negative, this same weakness would remain, as unlike vibranium, adamantium does not absorb the force of a blow. Number 3, Ruby Thursday. For some reason, Thursday Rubenstein thought it would be a good idea to replace her head with a red orb that can reshape itself into dangerous tentacles and spikes. She used these abilities to fight the Defenders as a member of the head-themed supervillain group known as the Headmen. Other abilities of the big red candy apple she calls a head are the ability to fire energy blasts and explode and reform. When concentrating really hard, she can also make the head take the form of a normal red-headed woman. Now, clearly nothing about Ruby Thursday makes sense, but this is the thing that really makes me scratch my head. Why is it harder for her to make the orb look like a head than it is for her to make it explode and reform? Come to think of it, why didn't she just make the head look normal to begin with? Number 2, Bizarro. A Superman villain with several different origins, sometimes being a clone, sometimes being from an alternate dimension, and sometimes being a duplicate created by the Joker when he had the ability to alter reality. Bizarro's deal is that he's the opposite of Superman in every way, including his speech. For example, if he was hungry, he would express this by saying something like, "Bizarro am full and no want pizza." He has superpowers, but in true Bizarro fashion, they manifest themselves as backwards versions of Superman's. So instead of heat vision and Arctic breath, Bizarro shoots ice beams out of his eyes and blows fire. What makes Bizarro's powers so confusing is the inconsistency that comes with them. His whole gimmick is supposed to be that he has the opposite powers of Superman, yet unlike Superman, he still has super strength and speed. You might think that I'm reading too much into this, but in All-Star Superman number 8, when Superman visits the Bizarro world, he sees a Bizarro version of the Flash, who boasts that he has a top speed of 2 inches per hour. So, by this logic, Bizarro should be weak and unable to fly, yet he still manages to consistently hold his own in fights with Superman. As Bizarro would put it, that makes perfect sense. Number 1. Kangaroo. When he was a child, Frank Oliver was obsessed with kangaroos. He would study them from a distance and even spent time living among them so that he could learn to mimic their abilities. When he grew up, he became a criminal who used his jumping abilities to commit robberies and then leap away like a kangaroo. Although he was later given augmentations that heightened his abilities, in his first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man number 81, he's just a normal human who can jump like a kangaroo. That's a bit far-fetched, even for a comic book. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he studied kangaroos so well that he learned to jump just as well as them. It still doesn't add up. Let's crunch some numbers. A kangaroo can leap a distance of about 25 feet, which is undeniably impressive. Now, the long jump world record is around 29 feet, so it is conceivable that a human could accomplish that. However, the maximum height a kangaroo can jump is 6 feet, yet in his first appearance, we see Frank consistently and easily leaping at least 15 feet high. For reference, the current high jump world record is just over 8 feet. That would be impossible for a kangaroo, let alone some regular Australian dude.
Number 10. Sonic Flight. Even with Sean Cassidy's accepted superhuman vocal stamina, this ability appears to be an odd one that doesn't really make a ton of sense. Banshee can produce a sonic scream, which he can use as a form of sonar, to injure those he fights with in battle and to shield himself or others, or disorient his enemies. Sure, that makes sense, but he also uses his sonic scream to fly, which would make sense if he were just using the ability to say, fly up to the second story of a building. But he has used this ability to fly longer distances as well, like over the ocean and stuff. However, in order to remain altitude and stay in the air, he has to keep screaming. So wait, how does he breathe? Well, we know he has enhanced vocal stamina, but this still doesn't really explain long trips. The answer is that he uses a winged gliding suit that allows him the time he needs to apparently breathe. However, without his winged gliding suit, his sonic flight powers would be pretty much useless. So yeah, kind of a weird ability. Number 9. Tentacles. Tentacles. Not to say that tentacles are inherently bad, by the way, they aren't, but what they are is kinda random, especially in this case. The tentacles I wanted to talk about here were Callisto's random tentacles. Callisto never really had tentacles until the early 2000s, but where did they come from? After all, she was introduced in the 1980s without them, and they just kinda seemed to appear one day. Mask was to blame for this alteration to Callisto's look, though she still had her famous eye patch at the time. She's never lost that, by the way. Mask gave Callisto tentacles to torment her. After he was defeated once more, she decided to actually keep them instead of be changed back. Not because they were useful, but because she refused to bargain with Mask anymore, so she just decided to accept them. She was like, I'm cool with these tentacles. The super weird thing is, although they were not a mutation of her own, they still disappeared along with her powers during the events of M-Day. Huh? Number 8. Superpower Manipulation. This is one that people can't seem to wrap their heads around because, well, it's just too overpowered, and why Hope Summers isn't utilized in the comics as often as someone of her power level could be, or maybe should be depending on your opinion. Superpower Manipulation is a weird one because it basically isn't a power that has any inherent weaknesses attached to it. You can do whatever you need to with that power. The possibilities are pretty much endless. In giving Hope this power, they created something virtually undefeatable, but when we read comics, the struggle is what we usually most enjoy exploring and reading about. So from a writer and storyteller context, this makes Hope's power a hard one to feature and use in comics, which is why you might notice stories that involve her don't usually focus on her insane power set. Number 7. Unlimited Magics. I feel like people often forget that Ilyana Rasputin's real mutant power is teleportation. She's a teleporter. And yet we all get more wrapped up in her magical abilities, her soul sword. Magic actually only has such powerful magical abilities because she was kidnapped by Belasco when she was very little, which is pretty weird. Just because she was tied to Limbo through her teleportation powers, where Limbo is basically a stepping stone for her while teleporting, she now just has unlimited magical power? Huh? Also, that whole story of Belasco kidnapping young Ileana, basically torturing her, and yet admiring and cherishing her as his protege all at the same time is just pretty odd and nonsensical to begin with.
Number 6. Final Crisis. Final Crisis, which wasn't really even the final crisis. For the Final Crisis, there are a few things that just make it confusing as heck. For starters, it was written by Grant Morrison. Basically, the story sees Darkseid invade the Earth. That's normal, but it's when the anti-life equation becomes involved that things just go all over the place. In the build-up to Final Crisis, Morrison gave DC a very rough outline of the book so they could do a build-up, but they had their own ideas on what the book should be, so they tailored the build-up to what they thought Final Crisis should be, and Morrison completely ignored everything that DC just did. So the build-up is basically useless. The 7 issues that make up the actual story are very hard to follow with the perspective of the story and which characters are involved, jumping from panel to panel and page to page. There are so many characters involved, some of which are hella obscure or are returning with no explanation, like Barry Allen. I mean, Superman defeats the villain in the end by singing. That's what we're dealing with here. It's weird. Number 5. Generations. The DC Elseworld stories are some of my favorite ones because largely the stories are self-contained, but it doesn't mean they can't be convoluted. Elseworlds Generations is a great example. Generations basically gets rid of the idea of comic book time following Batman and Superman's first appearances in the 1930s and then onward in real time. The two heroes basically remain unchanged throughout time, which makes sense for Superman, but for the Dark Knight, he exists forever because he essentially becomes the immortal Ra's al Ghul. It's not too bad, but it's in the 3rd arc of the series, Generations 3, things get really wacky. Centuries pass between each of the 12 issues in the arcs, which is confusing enough if you aren't prepared for it, but then in the final issues, that's when Darkseid invades and time travel rears its nice convoluted head. In the final battle, Batman and Superman are transported back to the 1930s and the first issues from Generations number 1. When the day is finally saved, Supes and Batman lose almost all of their memories and start all over again. Basically, Generations is one big convoluted circle. Number 4. Donna Troy. So, some of the entries on this list won't be so much about single storylines, but even the stories of some comic book characters in whole, particularly those who seem to have multiple different lives. For example, Donna Troy. Donna, like Wonder Woman, has several different origin stories, but while Diana's many beginnings are pretty similar to one another in a lot of ways, the story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman herself. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one pretty much every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy? From 1988 to 1989 to try and clean everything up, but even that story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all the separate threads of Donna finally came together and she was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the entire universe thanks to a spell, with all of her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Number 3. Batman No Man's Land. Now, No Man's Land was actually a pretty simple concept. Gotham is struck by an earthquake, and instead of repairing the city, the federal government deems it a lost cause, and they completely give up on the city and cut it off from the rest of the USA. The villains all form gangs and slice up Gotham into different territories, and Batman comes back to try and put Gotham back together again. This crossover event was huge. One of the most ambitious in DC's history. The writers even needed charts and maps to keep track of where everyone was at what time. The story included literally all the Batman and Batman family titles like Batman, Detective Comics, Shadow of the Bat, Legends of the Dark Knight, Robin, Catwoman, and Nightwing. Not to mention how the whole thing really started with the Cataclysm event, followed by the Road to No Man's Land before the event itself actually began. It's probably one of the best Batman stories out there, but at the time it came out, this thing was an expensive read if you wanted the entire story from beginning to end and to keep track of all its many moving parts. Number 2. Spider-Man One More Day. One More Day is infamous among Spider-Man fans, and understandably so. The story completely retcons Spider-Man's marriage to Mary Jane Watson out of continuity, which not only peed off a bunch of fans, but also brought up a lot of continuity questions. Marvel editorial made sure to say nothing about the years of stories had actually changed, but just the marriage part actually going through. So basically, this made a bunch of us sit here and wonder, why was Mary Jane still hanging out with the dude who left her high and dry at the altar? This was a relationship that had been built up over literal decades, that had been carried over into the movies, the newspaper strips, every other version of Spider-Man. It was arguably Marvel's best romance, and Marvel just took it away, made it Aunt May's fault, and expected us to believe that of all the villains, Mephisto, who isn't even a real Spider-Man villain, wanted their marriage destroyed in order to save Aunt May, when historically, souls are much more his thing. Number 1, House and Powers of X. Buckle up, because this is long. Jonathan Hickman's X-Men reboot joint stories, the House and Powers of X series, have been honestly awesome, but I can't lie, I struggled to follow exactly what was happening. Essentially, these stories established 4 different time periods all at the same time. The first, coming to us in the House of X, begins with Moira McTaggart meeting Charles Xavier and telling him to read her mind to see that she is now, sort of out of nowhere, an immortal time-looping mutant. Every time Moira loses her life, the timeline actually just resets. That's timeline number 1. Now jump forward a decade or so to the present day Marvel Universe, and Charles has partnered with Magneto and pretty much the entire mutant species to turn the sentient island Krakoa into a mutant paradise. Now, in Powers of X, we go forward about 100 years, with this future becoming one in which Sentinels, led by Nimrod, rose against mutants and mankind again, and the war has all but erased mutants from the entire solar system except for those few outnumbered holdouts still trying to win the day. And then lastly, we get to see Earth 1,000 years into the future, when none of it mattered because aliens or some kind of other advanced species took over the Earth. Now, going back to the 100 years in the future storyline, in the end of Powers of X, a doomed mission by the remaining mutants, led by Apocalypse, to learn the exact date that Nimrod is activated is successful, with Wolverine as the final survivor. It's then revealed that Moira McTaggart is still alive thanks to Apocalypse. Wolverine infuses the retrieved date into her conscious memory, and with the info of the exact day Nimrod doomed us all, Wolverine takes her life, resetting the timeline and actually looping the Powers of X story to lead directly to the start of the House of X story, and timeline number 1, which is actually now the present day main story, with Moira basically giving Xavier all the information to stop the mutant machine human war in the first place. Spider-Woman. Born in 1924, a little tiny Jessica Drew traveled with her parents Jonathan and Miriam to Mount Wundagore. There, her father Jonathan conducted genetics research with one Dr. Herbert Wyndham, who would later go on to become the incredibly powerful High Evolutionary. At 7 years old, Jessica contracted uranium poisoning from her father's work, but Jonathan and Wyndham managed to actually save her life using a spider-derived serum and combining it with years and years of hibernation in a genetic accelerator. Jessica then spent decades in stasis, receiving subliminal education via special tapes, kind of like how baby Superman was instilled with his values and all that jazz when traveling through space to Earth. When she finally awakened, she was cured and had only aged up to her early teens. She also discovered that she now possessed superhuman powers as a result of the combination of the radiation exposure and the spider serum. But then, later, it was said that her actual origin was because of a failed experiment that exposed Jessica's pregnant mom to radiation, which managed to give Jessica spider powers when she was born. Either way, when she first showed up in comic books in Marvel Spotlight number 32, she had become an agent of Hydra and was sent on a mission to try and wipe out the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury. Luckily, he brought her to the light side. But moving on from Spider-Woman to something completely insane, Bob Frank and his father Emil were traveling through Africa when they both unfortunately came down with an extremely deadly illness. Needing a transfusion in order to save their lives, Emil made it a mission to find someone who would be willing to help them and to save Bob's life. Apparently, there was absolutely no one who could help them out. But then, to make matters so much worse, Bob also also got bitten by a very deadly cobra. Bob was not having a good time. When that happened, a mongoose then just showed up and it introduced that snake to the afterlife. Of course, this must have been a sign, and Emil had the idea to use this mongoose for the transfusion instead of a regular human being to save his son's life. Not only did the mongoose DNA running through his veins somehow actually save his life, but naturally, this had the added benefit of allowing Bob to now run at super speed. Apparently, this was just common information, as Emil explained it as nonchalantly as pouring a cup of tea. Later on, it would be revealed that Frank had natural powers that were just jump-started by the addition of the mongoose DNA, but of course, that's only after they realized how that makes no sense. But moving on from that, a young Richard Grey, who would go on to become the flying superhero known as Black Condor, was the only survivor of an attack by Mongolian bandits on him and his archaeologist family. Now, stuck alone and in the wild, the little Richard was taken in by a family in the same kind of way that Mowgli was taken in by wolves and Tarzan was taken in by gorillas. Unfortunately, Richard was not a bird though. He didn't have the musculature or the feathers or anything really that allowed him to take flight like his new family could. But what are millions of years of evolution compared to the human brain and a little bit of practice? Richard spent most of his life studying the birds until he actually managed to just teach himself how to fly. Oh, there was also the exposure to a radioactive meteor that may have had something to do with it, but he truly believed that he had taught himself to fly. Once he was discovered by a missionary, Grey headed back home to the United States, where he became the flying adventurer known as the Black Condor. He went back specifically to save a certain US senator, but when he was actually too late, he just happened to look exactly like the senator, so he decided to abandon the name of Richard Grey and instead took the politician's identity. I think Richard Grey might actually just be insane.
Number 6. Flaming Prehensile Tongue. Toad has all sorts of odd abilities, but one of the most bizarre and odd by far is his prehensile tongue. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but Amanda, he's Toad. Sticky prehensile tongue should make sense for any amphibian-based mutants. But what about when we decide to make it flaming? Yeah, I know, right? That's weird. That was an update that Toad's tongue saw in the comics. Why? I guess because it looked cool. But his tongue was already not a super useful power to have, and adding flames, it doesn't really make it any more useful. It does make it look cooler though, I guess.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Number 5. Eggs. There's a few occurrences of this with mutants. Angel Salvador has this ability due to her insect physiology. It doesn't really do much as a power for her, it's just part of the way that she reproduces. Though it is pretty creepy and a little gross. But then again, so is most stuff involving the creation of new life, am I right? One of the other now remarkably famous mutants who have had this weird ability? Gold Balls, who now actually goes by the name Egg. He actually changed his code name due to the revelation regarding his powers. Originally, we just thought Gold Balls emitted gold bouncy balls out of his body, which seemed pretty odd and well, kinda useless. But then we realized in the events of Dawn of X that these gold balls were actually infertile eggs, which is also kinda useless. Unless, that is, you have the other 4 insanely powerful members of the mutant group known as the Five around you. When matched up with Elixir, Tempest, Hope Summers, and Proteus, Egg's abilities revealed themselves as being mighty useful, as together the 5 can combine their power sets in order to resurrect any of their fallen comrades. Still weird, but also kinda now amazing? Number 4. Aviation. The power of aviation through non-telekinetic means, that is. Most mutants that can naturally fly usually have this power as a result of a physical mutation. Some are simply granted wings, like Angel or Pixie, who otherwise find themselves looking like a standard human exteriorly, but some find themselves with a full-on bird-like mutation, like Beak. Beak's aviation mutation, depending on the artist, can leave him looking pretty all-out freaky. He's either drawn like a full-on bird person, or sometimes like a hybrid bird-human. His aviation mutation barely even gives him flight abilities as well. He isn't great at flying, but he can manage to do it for very short distances if he really tries. So why does he look like a bird then? It's not really useful. Number 3. Hollow bones. Speaking of flight-related mutations, one common trait that you'll see presented as a power or a perk is hollow bones. Angel and Beak both have hollow bones. What it's supposed to help with in regards to those mutants is help them accomplish the ability to fly. And I mean, usually it does by making them significantly lighter, but also hollow bones sound like something terrible to have in the midst of a battle. Somehow Angel has been presented as being very durable, despite the fact that his hollow bones have to exist in order for his flight powers to work and make sense. But if his bones are hollow, then shouldn't punches from foes with super strength cripple the poor original X-Men team member? Like what?
My only regret is that I have bonitis.
Number 2. Become ice cream. So far we've only seen this very specific mutant power once, and only in one single issue, and not even an issue of X-Men either, but instead Obnoxio, the clown's own series. One issue series. The mutant who possessed this ability? Ice Cream. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I know, a very original name. Ice Cream. Ice Cream used his abilities to infiltrate the X-Mansion, planning to put an end to the super team because their abilities made him feel ridiculous by comparison. I mean, I don't blame him. How he expected to accomplish this, however, with his power set being so useless, well, I have no idea. Number 1. Love Eyes. In all new Dupe, we gotta learn even more about Dupe's capabilities. Well, we don't really know what Dupe is still exactly. He has been a member of the X-Men, and hasn't been confirmed either way in regards to his mutant status, or, well, any other status for that matter. We don't know if he's an alien, or if he was made in a lab, or what's really going on with him. None of it's really fully been confirmed. What we do know is that he has a slew of insanely powerful and ridiculously cartoonish abilities. One such ability is Love Eyes, which seems to have no real specific purpose. Kitty Pryde suspected that he was using his love eyes to try and enchant her, casting a love spell on her, but Dupe claimed that they're just how he shows affection. Ineffective love spell or just a weird quirk. Either way, they're pretty irrational.
Coming in at number 10 is Iska the Unbeaten. This spot could as easily been taken by Domino, as Iska also has a form of limited psychokinesis, which is probability manipulation, or also known as the power of luck, which is probably one of the most unexplainable powers because we can't even say that luck is for sure a real thing. But Iska takes it one step further into ridiculousness with the power of being literally unable to lose. Iska has the power to always win, no matter what, whether that is individual one-on-one contests, votes, or wagers, or larger battles where she is a member of a group. In contests of skill, her powers might give her the talent she needs to win, or she might just win through, quote, improbable circumstances. In larger battles or wars, her powers detect the probability of both sides winning and have literally led her to defect from the losing side and join the winning side, meaning she still personally wins. It's not that we don't understand it, it's that it can't even properly be explained without sounding utterly ridiculous. Love Iska the Unbeaten though, great character. Number 9. Rainbow Girl. She is the first superpowered individual on this list affiliated with the Legion of Superheroes, but she definitely won't be the last. The team seems to be just a sticky flytrap for all the random and wacky superheroes out there in the universe. Unlike some others though, Rainbow Girl didn't actually make it onto that team as her powers were deemed not useful enough. Instead, she made it onto the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which I'm assuming is the Legion that villains either don't listen to, or the Legion that just puts on a movie for villains to watch instead of just teaching them. I mean, fighting them. Anyways, why is Rainbow Girl useless? Well, she can harness the emotional spectrum. Red for rage, orange for green, yellow for fear, green for will, blue for hope, indigo for compassion, and violet for love. But unlike the Lanterns, she has no ring to use the power through, and she cycles through the colors impulsively, meaning it leads to terrible mood swings. Number 8. Legion. David Haller was living in Paris with his mother when her home was invaded by a assassination team. They took out David's stepfather before his eyes, which kicked off his latent psionic powers, which he used to incinerate the brains out of the assassins. However, as he did so, he made telepathic contact with each of his victims, thus experiencing their thoughts and emotions as they died, which, as you can imagine, deeply affected David, forcing him into a catatonic state. The consciousness of the leader of the assassins, Jamail Karami, was absorbed and merged into David's mind. The terrible trauma that David had suffered had splintered David's personality into multiple multiple alters, with each of these alters controlling a different psionic power. Because of this, Legion is an Omega level mutant able to create spontaneous mutations of different kinds that are accompanied by new personas or alter egos to govern each one of these new mutations. Now, David himself stated that he had in his mind 200 Omega level split personalities, but the X-Men Rogue stated that while she was inside Legion, she was connected to thousands of types of powers, and there were more, quote, being born all the time. How this works, I have absolutely no idea, but it does, and he is scary. Number 7, Matter Eater Lad. Honestly, Tenzil Kem's power, one shared by his whole race, gives me more questions than it gives me answers. Matter Eater Lad's main shtick is that he can eat any substance of matter in any form, solid, liquid, or gas, in any amount at super speed. Bismalians, which are his race, come from a planet where over time microbes made regular food inedible. In turn, their species evolved to be able to eat any form of matter thanks to producing a variety of digestive enzymes that act on specific substances, making them easier to chew and digest. Bismalians can also metabolize food almost instantly, and if they gotta, they can consume tons of food in minutes. So where I am left confused is exactly where all that stuff goes. Not to get too into it here, but what's Tenzil's bathroom situation like? Also dental. I'm assuming their teeth are of a denser material than human teeth. One Bismalian who was part of the Yellow Lanterns ate people, which caused him to get his teeth removed as punishment, but he then had those replaced with Bismalian steel, allowing him to bite through almost anything. So my question is, could he not bite through anything before? Also, if Tenzil eats a whole asteroid, which he has done before, where does he poop? I just have so many questions and no answers. I would just one answer. Now, between roughly 1950 and 1970, 90% of superhero origin stories involved either chemicals or radiation. That's just kind of how it worked. The Flash we are all most familiar with, Barry Allen, became the fastest man alive when he was working at his forensic laboratory one night. A bolt of lightning struck his rack of chemicals and also Barry himself. In a stroke of luck, instead of completely frying the guy, the electricity from the lightning mixed with a unique and specific collection of chemicals, and it gave Barry Allen super speed and access to the Speed Force. While that may give you some pause, it's a classic origin story, and most of us have just come to accept it now. 3 years after The Flash debuted, Barry Allen was visited by Wally West, the nephew of Barry's girlfriend, Iris West. Wally was a big fan of The Flash, so Barry took him on a tour of his lab, the very lab where he was struck by lightning and gained his powers. Well, what do you know? A rogue bolt of lightning struck the very same rack of chemicals, all of which were still stored alongside each other, and then the lightning struck Wally West. The electricity mixed with this apparent unique collection of chemicals, and can you guess what happened? Yeah, Wally West gained super speed and access to the Speed Force. It's not like it doesn't make sense for the same event to produce the same outcome, but I guess lightning really do be striking twice, I guess. Or we got lazy with the writing. I'll let you pick. But while you're deciding on that, did you ever just randomly, accidentally drink a formula for creating super plastic thinking that it was soda instead? Has that ever happened to you? No, it probably hasn't. And if it did, you'd probably need to be rushed to the hospital. That's because we live in the real world. But in DC Comics, all logic just goes out the window. So when Chuck Tane mistook a super plastic formula for soda pop and downed the whole thing down his gullet, instead of needing urgent medical attention, he instead gained the ability to inflate himself to a ridiculous degree and bounce around with enough speed and velocity to actually make him incredibly efficient in combat. Chuck went on to become a key member of the 30th century's Legion of Superheroes as Bouncing Boy, and I think I've said enough about him. Alan Scott was the first ever original Green Lantern, but while the other lanterns that we have come into contact with were test pilots, veteran soldiers, and comic book artists who were chosen to become members of an intergalactic corps of space cops, Alan Scott was a train engineer, saved from what would have been a fatal train accident by a magical green engineer's lantern made thousands of years ago in China out of a meteorite. But get this, the meteorite in question actually housed the spirit known as the Star Heart that needed to fulfill a prophecy to bring death, life, and power. Apparently, the spirit had already at some point in the past brought death and life already, so when it came upon Alan Scott, it was time to bring power in the form of his unique magical power ring. The funny thing was that even when DC Comics created Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, Alan's origins remained exactly the same. Only change came when Jeff Johns made it so that the Star Heart used to be an experiment that the Guardians of Oa were unable to contain. As it made its way to Earth in the form of a meteorite to one day save Alan Scott, it took some inspiration from the Green Lantern Corps, seemingly influencing Scott to take the Green Lantern name. But the weirdest thing about this whole origin is that Alan Scott's main weakness is wood. What's up with that? I don't know. But from one strange lantern to another, the son of a poor farmer, Daniel Cormack was raised in Ireland. Like most Irish people, he came into contact with the Seed. They're basically an Irish fairy people, some of whom he managed to become really good pals with. Now it turns out that the fairies actually really liked Daniel because Maeve, the fairy queen, granted him a magical lantern as repayment for his friendship to the fairy people. The power of this lantern is interesting. It slowly waxes until its peak at midnight and then slowly wanes after until it is at its weakest at noon. Now with his lantern, Jack is able to fly, teleport himself or others, generate blasts of energy, create illusions, generate fog, change the size of enemies and bind them inside the lantern, and he can also become superhumanly strong and durable. That's a great set of powers. Now using the lantern, he took up the identity of Jack-O-Lantern and became Ireland's premier superhero, eventually joining the Global Guardians, even getting two successors in the form of Marvin Noronsa and eventually Liam McHugh. Now, coming up in our third to last spot today, a lot of comic book superhero origins have to do with some kind of accident. A freak lightning bolt, an interrupted gamma explosion, an alien plane crash, it's just how it goes. But for professional saxophone blower Johnny Domino, aka the Nightman, his mysterious abilities to hear evil thoughts, see at night, no longer require sleep, psychically control a length of rope, and produce lightning through a connection to Celtic magic, all came about when he was just driving his Miata through the San Francisco Bay Area and an out-of-control streetcar, which got hit by magic lightning, crashed into him. Johnny Domino ended up in a coma for several weeks, and when he finally came back to, boom, powers. Not a bad deal until you learn that the big old downside to all of his powers is that he is now a cannibal. Nightman needs to literally consume a broth consisting of a handful of human organs every couple of months in order for him to stay alive. Reading that made me nauseous. Also, the Nightman even had his own short-lived TV show, and if you haven't seen the intro for that show, trust me, you gotta check it out. And in for our runner-up spot today, when Ralph Dibny of DC Comics was a tiny little Ralph Dibny, he saw a contortionist at a carnival and he was instantly down to be just like that guy. Everyone has their thing, and for Ralph, his thing was trying to figure out how someone could twist and fold their body into all sorts of shapes like that guy could. Obsessed with learning the secrets of the contortionists, for years and years, Ralph figured out that all the contortionists he observed drank the same drink. Not some crazy formula, not some kind of tea, but it was actually a popular soft drink known as Gingle. Now, Ralph knew for the most part that it was just a coincidence that they all drank the same drink, but that doesn't mean he wasn't gonna bet everything he had on it. Ralph ended up literally teaching himself chemistry, which should be the superpower here, and then he used these newly found chemistry abilities to create a super concentrated extract from the fruit that was the basis and heart for the Gingle drink, the Gingo fruit. What do you know? The super concentrated extract allowed him to make any part of his body stretch to ridiculous degrees. What's that, I hear you say? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. You're right. But finally, coming in at our number one spot today, The Flaming Carrot has been published by different publishers all over the place, so I'd forgive you for not knowing who he is. From Aardvark Vanaheim, Renegade Press, and Dark Horse Comics until 2005, when he began being published by Image Comics. Other reason that you may not know who he is because look at him. He's utterly ridiculous. His utterly ridiculous look is matched by his equally ridiculous origin story. Essentially, the Flaming Carrot became a superhero after deciding to read 5,000 comic books in a row. Curiously, for him, reading that many comics caused the unknown man to get brain damage. He then donned a giant carrot for a mask, which was topped with an eternal flame, and he became a crime fighter. His gear and equipment is pretty equally nuts. He has a utility belt which carries a yo-yo, Lucky Rabbit's foot, laughing gas, a magnifying glass, band-aids with little stars and rockets on them, silly putty, a skeleton key, stink bombs, a decoder badge, Pez candy, a magnet, a bubble pipe, super glue, a wishbone, training cards, invisible ink, sneeze powder, and fizzies. That's his gear, alongside a nuclear-powered pogo stick which is in his mask, and flippers that he wears at all times just in case he has to swim.
In at number 10, vampirism. Vampire Hulk? Yes, that's an actual thing. How the hell did that happen? Well, once upon a time on Earth 1610, Tony Stark's older brother created a clone of the Hulk who was much less interested in eating people and having fatal sexual intercourse with others. Fatal for them, not for him. He's kind of a horn dog and also super sexual assaulty. Yeah, he's a bad dude. That's the Ultimate Universe. Now this Hulk though is often referred to as Nerd Hulk, and while he is capable of maintaining his intellect, he's much weaker than the original 1610 Hulk thanks to him having control over his emotions, making him much less brutal and violent in combat, which actually Captain America of this universe is like, that makes him crappier. He's less good. He was eventually rejected from the Ultimates and found himself visiting New York City where he would be attacked by vampires, becoming one of them. Gotta love comics. He tried to bite and convert the Avengers yet failed and ended up taking over the group when he decided to undermine and kill their current leader. He ended up dying when exposed to sunlight, with Captain America letting him burn alive for a bit before ultimately decapitating him. Speaking of death, that brings us to our next number. In at number 9, he's undead. On Earth 9602 that is. So on that Earth, the Hulk is an undead creature. This is Skulk. He is the amalgamation of the Hulk and Solomon Grundy, and yes, he is undead. After an experiment with radiation went horribly wrong for Bruce Banner, he fused with the elemental entity of Solomon Grundy from the DC universe. This is the amalgam universe that we were talking about after all. This gave him the combined strength of the Hulk and all of the Hulk's abilities, along with Grundy's, whose exact nature of powers are unknown. Grundy himself is a reanimated corpse, mystically connected to the swamp where he died, and he was reborn. Every time he dies, that swamp gives him a new life, which must come in handy, but you're also an undead, reanimated living corpse, so I don't know if it's a good trade-off. Pretty good not being a corpse, although I've never been a corpse, so I wouldn't know if it's a bad thing. Just saying. In at number 8, willful transformation. The Hulk of Earth 928 has the ability to transform at will, which comes in handy. This Hulk, known as Hulk 2099, looks way more like a dinosaur than the traditional Hulk. With razor-sharp claws and fangs capable of tearing through steel, he's everything that the 616 Hulk is, but more vicious and more controlled. He was transformed by a gamma device used on him by the Knights of Banner cult, a group who worshipped the 20th century Hulk. This weapon of theirs was developed after they began experiments with gamma radiation in hopes of creating a new Hulk. And they got their wish when John Eisenhart, a movie studio exec, approached them in hopes of securing the rights to their story. When they said no, he reported their gamma experiments to authorities, who then slaughtered the cult, but then during the crossfire he was hit by that gamma weapon and became the Hulk. In at 7, he's a cannibal. Okay, sure, cannibalism is not a power. If anything, it's just a sickly scare tactic this Hulk uses in battle, but it is still a facet of the Ultimate Universe character that confuses some, so we've added it to our list. You can call it a power if you want. It's kinda weird if you do. Now for starters, the first time the Ultimate version of Bruce Banner transformed into the Hulk, it was a one-time thing. When he's later asked to work towards creating a new super soldier formula, he gets frustrated and ends up transforming himself when he injects himself with it to test. This transformation becomes permanent this time, and he would later confess that the honest-to-God truth of the matter was that he just missed being big. But this form has clearly impacted his psyche because he is a major He's such a threat that he needs to be locked up and is used as a weapon of last resort, with Cap getting the permission to traumatize Banner in order to get him to attack and act out against their enemies. He ends up eating a Chitauri agent, and in the Ultimate Wolverine vs. the Hulk issue 2, Hulk ends up devouring a bunch of co-workers on a farm after they make fun of Bruce Banner's decision to be vegan, along with questioning his sexuality, something that the Hulk seems to be very sensitive about in this universe. It triggers him into violence on multiple occasions. He even yells out "Hulk straight" at one point, so maybe he is a little little gay.
Number 6. The Flash. Wally West is easily the fastest of all the speedsters out there. He has an almost spiritual connection to the Speed Force that allows him to do a great number of things, from traveling time to creating electrical energy constructs. Thanks to a heart condition, Wally has even been able to freeze time, which basically allows him to move at super speed without actually moving at super speed. And if you can explain exactly how that works to me, I will give you $1 single. That's all I got. The Speed Force is basically time, the representation of reality in motion, being the very cosmic force that pushes space and time forward. So how is it that people can hold chunks of it, or create lightning constructs with it, or absorb speed and momentum from other people or things? As a concept for time and a cosmic force, it is really hard to both wrap your head around it and explain the Speed Force and all the things that speedsters like Wally West and Barry Allen are able to do with it. You kind of just have to accept that this is what it is. Number 5. The Hulk. Everyone knows Hulk's ability to turn into a big old green monster and rip things apart with a strength that increases based on his anger. But what many of you may not know is that Hulk actually possesses a much more subtle ability to see astral projections and ghosts, and even interact with them if he chooses. Hulk's astral form perception has come in handy when working with Doctor Strange as a defender. But why does Hulk have this ability? Well, Bruce Banner subconsciously feared his father's ghost would come back to haunt him, like literally come back to haunt him. And so the Hulk just developed this mechanism to allow him to look out for that ghost, and I guess other ghosts as well. There isn't really more to it. Hulk just developed the ability that is something usually reserved for telepaths. For the super intelligent Bruce Banner, it would make a bit more sense, but it's been suggested that for Bruce, the clarity of the astral forms is diminished when compared to the telepathically resistant Hulk's ability to view them. With Immortal Hulk and the connection to the One Below All, perhaps that could serve as some kind of fan explanation, but we don't have a real one, so no. Number 4. Jin Genie. Jin Genie was a mutant, but unlike almost any other mutant ever, her powers were directly dependent on how much alcohol she consumed. Becca Parker had the power to generate seismic vibrations proportionate to her amount of alcoholic intake. As you can imagine, being intoxicated in order to use your superpowers can be rather interesting. It seems like one of those things you should add to the list of things you shouldn't do while under the influence. Like, don't drive, don't operate heavy machinery, don't use your superpowers to cause seismic vibrations, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, we do not get to see her use her powers that much, or get an explanation for why alcohol fuels said powers, because Jin Genie is de-lifed in the same comic that she was introduced in, X-Force number 116 in July 2001. Number 3. Superman. Back in the day, while Superman was a fairly new being, he would kind of have whatever superpower he wanted / needed at the time, until eventually his set table of powers was established. But there is one new power that appeared in 1958, Superman number 125, where Superman learned to fire a tiny version of himself out of his hands. After discovering a tiny spaceship that blows up in his face, Superman loses all of his abilities minus, interestingly, his invulnerability. Luckily, he gained the ability to literally fire a doll-sized version of himself out of his hand that had all of his powers and would go and beat up criminals or melt icebergs. What's hilarious is that Superman even got jealous of the little mini-him. When a guided missile was on its way to the Eiffel Tower, he sent out his little buddy and an onlooker shouted, "How cute!" To which he said, "Cute? What nonsense!" Fortunately for Superman, his mini-me was destroyed by a kryptonite meteorite and Superman's powers were restored to him. Number 2. Color Kid. Ulu Vac from the planet Lupra is the hero known as Color Kid, and his name does indeed suit his abilities. Vac was struck by a multicolored beam of light from another dimension that granted him the incredible power to alter the color of objects and people, and that is literally all he can do. It's stated that this power is probably caused by him changing the spectrum of light around the person or thing, but there are no real explanations given. It also does absolutely nothing for him or anyone else. Color Kid decided to use this power to go and audition to be a member of the Legion of Superheroes, and what do you know, he was rejected from the team and his powers were deemed useless. While it may be true, it feels a little bit mean, but at least he got in with the Legion of Substitute Heroes, so there's that. And in at number 1 is El Guapo. Robbie Rodriguez Rodriguez, who goes by El Guapo, is a mutant from the Marvel Universe. But that kind of opens up a whole bunch of questions because Robbie doesn't seem to have any powers of his own, unless you consider his symbiotic relationship with his flying skateboard a superpower. His wiki page refers to this as a idiosyncratic manipulation, suggesting that Robbie actually has total control over his skateboard. But the problem with that statement is that his skateboard also acted with a mind of its own, like when it beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. Now, an argument could be made that perhaps it's his own subconsciousness beating himself up for doing the wrong thing, but that's just a me theory, and Marvel did not state this to be true or even explain his ability at all, really. It's not telekinesis, and the board seems to have a mind of its own. I don't know, you tell me what you think.